I'm Teresa Colon of Wounded Birds Ministry, and I want to welcome you to this video. Today we're going to be talking about thinking distortions, what they are, and how we can overcome them. So I kind of want to start with first just talking about what a thinking distortion is. So thinking distortions are basically they're shortcuts that our brains have learned to take. When we have experiences, we teach our brains how to respond to certain situations. And when we have those automatic experiences, or when we have those automatic responses, there are thoughts that run through our head with those. And those automatic thoughts, they kind of become a tape that plays inside our heads. And a lot of times that tape can be positive, especially if all our experiences have been positive. The tape can also be very negative if we've had very negative experiences. So it's learned thinking, and part of that learned thinking is that it always appears true regardless of what the facts are. So let's take a quick example. Let's say we're at church and we see Susie. I go, "Oh," and I wave to Susie, and Susie doesn't wave back to me. Well, what happened? Somebody who has had very positive experiences in their relationships, the automatic thought that's going to happen in their head is, "Oh, she must not have seen me." But someone who's had negative experiences in their relationships, who has felt maybe rejected or has had some trauma associated with those relationships, may have a different automatic response. Their automatic response may be, "Why didn't she wave back at me? Doesn't she like me anymore? What did I do to cause this?" Even if it's not true. But when we have those learned responses, when our brains start to develop those shortcuts, those stories that we create appear very true to us. Nobody is going to like me. Everybody is going to think this is stupid. I should know better by now. Those are shortcuts that our brains have learned to take, and that's not always the healthiest thinking. But just because they're shortcuts doesn't mean that it's a lazy way of thinking. What it means is that it's automatic. And when I say automatic, it could be so automatic that you don't even know you're having these thoughts. When I first learned about thinking distortions and I started doing exercises to overcome those thinking distortions in my head, I was really surprised at how many hidden automatic thoughts existed in my brain. It wasn't until I started breaking them down that I even knew to identify some of them, because they were so automatic, it was just the truth. I never complete anything. I'm too sensitive. Those are things that you just learn. You go, "Oh, this is just describes who I am." Well, no, not necessarily. You have to make sure that the story you're telling yourself fits the facts of the situation. And thinking distortions, just like the word says, they distort that perception. And they help us create stories that do not fit the facts. Okay? So they're not lazy. They're just learned behaviors. So we've already talked about how we develop them. And what I want to talk about next is what happens when we have these thinking distortions. So my family and I recently took a cruise. It was great. We went up to Alaska. And as we were on the cruise, my husband and I headed up to the deck where they steer the ship. I want to call it the galley, but I'm pretty sure it's not the galley, so excuse me. All right, so when we went up there, what was really neat was that we could see the crew and everybody piloting the ship from on the other side of a glass panel. And on our side of the glass panel, they had some of the instrumentation, so we could actually see how the ship was charting. One of the things that we could see was actually whether or not the ship was on course. And what this piece of instrumentation looked like was, if you've ever seen a movie like Top Gun, you know, you've got the circle and you've got the little blip and all that stuff, right? Well, okay, so we're blipping. But we're blipping within a cone that is displayed on the panel. And that tells us if we are within the range that we need to be in order to achieve our destination. So if the ship starts to fall off destination, let's say we're supposed to be here, and instead we're pointed this way. Well, right now we're doing okay, but give us an hour or so, or even 2 hours, or even 4 hours. And next thing you know, we're headed to Russia and not to Juneau, which is not what we want. And the further off course we get, the harder it becomes to course correct and get back on track, okay? So thinking distortions do the same things to our brains. Here's another example. We get into a car accident. Let's say I get rear-ended. First thought, oh my gosh, I am such a bad driver. I can't believe I got into an accident. Following from there, following from there, next thing that happens, my insurance is going to go up. Oh my gosh, my premiums are going to be so expensive as a result of this car accident. I can't afford an increased premium. If I can't afford my premium, then I can't pay my insurance. If I can't pay my insurance, I can't drive my car. If I can't drive my car, I can't get to work. If I don't get to work, I can't pay my rent or my mortgage. We're going to be homeless. And all that's happened is you've had a very minor fender bender at 25 miles an hour, but somehow, because of those thinking distortions, because of the automatic thoughts that run in our head, we're homeless because we got rear-ended in a small fender bender. That may not have even been our fault. So that's an example where one thinking distortion leads to another thinking distortion, leads to another thinking distortion. Next thing you know, our brains are way off course, okay? When we have each of those thinking distortions, right, they change our emotions, they change our moods, and our bodies physically respond, right? Man, I got into a fender bender. Okay, that's stressful. So now we're already feeling a little stressed out, but it's not that bad, all things considered. I've gone from having a fender bender to now I can't afford my insurance premium. Well, guess what? Now my stress levels are going up. I'm starting to get anxious. My anxiety levels are going up. And what happens with that? I start to develop a headache, my shoulders start to tighten, and maybe my voice goes up a little bit in pitch. Okay, but now because I can't afford my premiums, I won't be able to get to work, and we're going to be homeless. Well, at this point, my jaw is tight, my throat is clenched, I have a stomach ache, the headache is a raging factor. All these thinking distortions cause emotional and mood changes inside of us. They cause us to feel and feel things that as a result of those distortions. And those emotions and those thoughts also reflect in what happens with our bodies, okay? This can be exhausting, having all these thoughts running through your head, having all these changes happening inside our bodies. Maybe your heart is racing. This is exhausting, especially for those of us who live with this automatic tape always running depending on different situations where it's so easily triggered. It is exhausting to maintain all these extra thoughts, okay? So the good news is these are learned behaviors. This is learned thinking. And when we can learn how to think this way, we can learn how to think a different way. That is great news. I don't know about you, but when I heard that the first time, I was excited. I was really relieved. I have a way to help influence my thinking. So this is not an easy process. This is not a fast process. So I want to let you know before we start talking about how we fix it, that you need to be patient with yourself. You're not going to get this right the first time. You're going to have these situations come up again, and maybe the first time you respond a little bit better. Maybe you go from the car accident to not being able to make it to work, okay, as opposed to suddenly being homeless. That's an improvement. That's help, okay? But the next time you go through it, you go through the exercise again, and you go, oh, you know what? It's a car accident, and well, maybe the premiums go up. I'm going to have to figure out if I can pick up an extra shift or two so I can pay it. From there, every time we go through this exercise, maybe we identify a few additional automatic thoughts that we didn't realize were in our head. Or maybe we start identifying the physical cues that happen in our bodies. Like all of a sudden, my chest gets warm. And I realize, oh, something is going on. These physical cues can sometimes tune us into what's happening inside our brain. One woman I was working with this week actually talked about how she can be numb. She doesn't even know what emotion she's having. That's not that unusual, especially when we're talking about people who live with depression and anxiety. But just because you're numb to the emotion doesn't mean the emotion isn't happening. It just means that you're not conscious of it. And that's where it becomes super important to pay attention to those bodily signals. Those bodily signals sometimes tell us there is an emotion happening, and then that puts us in a state where we have to figure out what we're feeling and name it, okay? So this isn't easy. This is really difficult work. So I'm just going to talk you through the very high level of how we start to change our thinking. And the first thing we have to do is we have to identify what happened that caused the automatic tape to go off. What was the event? It can be really clear cut when it comes to something like an accident or Susie not waving to me at church. But it can also be something else. It could also be a comment made by somebody else. I mentioned earlier that phrase, "you're too sensitive." Well, if I've heard that a lot as a child, that you never complete anything, well then guess what is ingrained in my brain? And if I know I'm too sensitive, that idea may not even come up, okay? But if I've heard that from my mom, then the next time my mom says you're too sensitive, that's going to just set off a whole bunch of other thoughts that I've now associated with that particular idea. So we first need to identify what the trigger is. And in this case, we talk sometimes about how a change in mood and a change in emotion can be a biological factor. And that's true when we're talking about the onset of depression or some of these other things. But when we're talking about our thoughts, when we're talking about changing how we're thinking, we're not talking about biological factors. We're really talking about a situation, something very specific that we can point to that was a trigger that started this whole process, okay? So we first identify what the trigger is, and then from there we start to catalog all the impacts that it has. So I had this situation. What are all the thoughts that came with it? I'm a bad driver. I should know better. My husband is going to kill me. All those little thoughts that start to run through your head, we need to write each one of those down, okay? To the extent that you can even identify them, because sometimes this can be like peeling an onion, where you go, oh, I have this thought, and then the next time you go through the exercise, you go, oh, and then there's these 3 other thoughts I wasn't even aware of, okay? So we start off by identifying all the thoughts, and then we go and we identify all the emotions. So I've gotten into this car accident, my husband's going to kill me. How am I feeling? I'm feeling scared. I'm feeling vulnerable. I'm feeling angry because I can't believe I did this again. There may be a lot of different emotions that are going on inside us. So how does my body reflect those? Well, that's going to depend based on what emotions you're feeling. So I could be feeling a headache. I could be feeling a really clenched throat. Or I had another woman tell me it feels like there's a rock in my throat. I could be feeling a tight chest. My stomach could be rumbling. My shoulders could be up near my ears. My jaw could be clenched. I may be grinding my teeth even while I'm awake. Some people have hands go numb. These are all signals that our body is responding to something that is happening. Write down all those different things that you feel. Know what those body sensations are. And you may find that they pertain to a variety of different thoughts, and that's okay. We're just writing it down for this one situation, okay? After we're done writing down all the thoughts, all the emotions, and all the bodily sensations that we feel, the next thing we do is we look at those thoughts and we evaluate them for truth. My husband's going to kill me. If you're not in an abusive relationship, the likelihood that your husband is going to kill you for having somebody else rear-end you is very slim. Let's be a little bit more realistic. Is your husband literally going to kill you? Probably not. Should I know better? Well, I was stopped at a stoplight. Could I have done anything different? No. That other car needed to do something different. Okay, so we've determined that one's a lie. I'm a terrible driver. Am I really a bad driver? How long has it been since I last got a ticket? How long has it been since I last had a car accident? And did I cause this car accident? If I was sitting at the red light and somebody else rear-ended me, how am I a bad driver because somebody else hit me? They're the bad driver. So we need to start looking at each of those thoughts that we're having and validate them. Are they really true? After we go through that and we determine whether or not they're true, we need to identify the thinking distortion that's associated with it. My husband's going to kill me. That's mind reading. We're assuming we know how he's going to react. We assume we know what he's going to say. We assume we know what he's going to think. We're mind reading. And I don't know about you, but my crystal ball tends to be very, very broken. When it comes to not being able to pay my premiums, now all of a sudden I'm fortune telling. I'm deciding that I will not be able to afford my insurance premiums. First of all, if I'm not at fault at this accident, what's the likelihood that I'm even going to have an impact on my insurance premium? And if so, who knows how big it's going to be? It may be a little bit higher. It may be a lot higher. But just because I've been in this accident doesn't necessarily mean that my insurance premiums are going to go up, or that they're going to go up so much that I can't afford them anymore. So let's stop fortune telling. That's what that one is. 14 of the most common thinking distortions at woundedbirdsministry.com. And those will run you through some pretty good ones, like overgeneralization. We'll go into more detail on mind reading, etc. Okay. So now we've identified where the thinking distortion is. And as we continue to go through these exercises with different events, sometimes we can identify a pattern. Like, I know I tend to fortune tell an awful lot. I also know I tend to name call a lot. So I am likely to say, oh, Teresa, you're so stupid. Oh, Teresa, you're such a procrastinator. Oh, Teresa, you never complete anything. That's name calling. And if there's one thing that I don't need to be doing is name calling, right? I have another woman who would hear her daughter talk about herself in those kinds of terms, and she would say, don't you talk about my daughter like that. And when I think about that, not only do I remember that name calling is not okay, I also think of God saying that. God saying, don't talk about my daughter like that. That's not how I made my child. And I am God's child. So labeling and identifying these thinking distortions sometimes help us identify patterns, and we can start to change them. And one way we can start to change them is by saying, would I say this to my best friend? Would I say this to my child? What would God say about this, like we just went through? As we start to identify that stuff, now we can start to put a new phrase, a new thought in place. Instead of saying, my husband's going to kill me, you can say, I'm not looking forward to telling my husband. That is totally an acceptable response. At church, instead of saying, what did I do to Susie that she didn't wave back at me, we can say, Susie probably didn't see me at church, and that's why she didn't wave. Maybe I should go over and say hi to Susie so that she does see me, because I know she likes me. We can start to put new thoughts and new responses into place. And it takes practice to go through these. The first time this trigger happens, we're probably not going to be successful in responding differently, in choosing a different thought. But as we continue to practice this, it becomes a muscle. We're building muscle memory, or memory muscle, however you want to phrase it. We start to reflexively do our new thought, think our new thought instead of the default shortcut that we have. We're changing the shortcut. Instead of the shortcut taking us way off course, this shortcut starts to bring us right back on course before we've gotten too far off. So practice and patience. Practice and patience. You may have to go through this exercise for the exact same scenario several times as you identify new automatic thoughts that happen. And that's okay. That's normal, and that's okay. What's more important is that you're going and doing the work and thinking your way through this and making an effort, because just making an effort starts to rewire your brain. Okay, so I have some additional resources for you. First of all, you can go to woundedbirdsministry.com, and there you will find a couple of blog posts specifically on thinking distortions and how to change them. I also refer to it as CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. This is a commonly well-known psychotherapy approach. So this is all evidence-based that we're talking about. I also have a Thinking Distortions workbook that's available. And in that workbook are the 14 common thinking distortions that I was talking about earlier. So I've gone through and I've looked at a lot of different thinking distortions, and I've kind of distilled them down to the 14 that are most common. You can do a search on Google and you can find lists of 50 or more thinking distortions. I think that you'll find that overwhelming, and I think that these 14 will probably be enough to help you get started. If you really find that you're struggling and that these thinking distortions don't match the particular situation, then, feel free to Google. But I really think these 14 are going to get you what you need. In the second part of that workbook, we actually go through, there's a worksheet that you can go through that really in detail walks you through each of these steps that you need to do in order to start changing your thinking. And there's a detailed blog post associated with it as well that walks you through each of these individual steps. And you can find all this at the Wounded Birds Ministry website. In addition, we do have a Facebook page, facebook.com, Wounded Birds Ministry, and we have a Facebook group. I would really encourage you to join the Facebook group. It's confidential. Anything you like or comment on won't be reflected out to all your other friends. It's really confidential, so you can decide what you're comfortable with sharing within your circle. But this is a good place for you to come and get support and to get more education and to get more encouragement. And then you can also find me at WBirds Ministry on Twitter. That's another place. I really think that you want to go to the website and download that particular workbook. I think you're going to find it really helpful. So we don't have a lot of time today, but I think this pretty much covers everything regarding thinking distortions. I want to thank you for joining us. Again, my name is Teresa Colon with Wounded Birds Ministry, and I hope you have a great day. Take care.